Ooh. Okay. Hey guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and today I am showing off some of the series that I really want to finish. I have dropped this stack of books on myself like 4 times. And it's getting a little bit ridiculous because I have a lot of books in this stack. Because I have, for most of my life, been a notorious series abandoner. I don't really tend to get like super hooked into a series in the way that some other readers do. I am one of those people who just can kind of like close a book and finish it and move on to the next thing. So for many years, pretty much until I started booktube, even after I started booktube, but really this year, now that I think of it, I have never been good at finishing series, just at all. And one of the nice things about booktube is the fact that I am much more encouraged to actually finish what I start, which is great. The problem with this, as you will see with a number of these series, is that it has been so long since I read the first book, or maybe the second book in these series, that I need to restart some of them. So honestly, I don't know how many series I have to show you right now. I pulled basically all the books in each series that I have on my shelf off the shelf, so I have a ton of stuff here because sci-fi and fantasy series are not technically very short. And yeah, so we're gonna go through some stuff that I have started but not finished. However, I am either planning on going back to the beginning and doing a rare reread, or I am just going to crack on with. So let's start off with probably the most popular series that is on this list. They're all hardbacks and they're all freaking huge. I have the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. I recently picked up a copy of The Way of Kings in hardbacks. They all look nice and pretty. These are the American editions, which I get from Book Depository because the British editions are just way too classy for all of Brandon Sanderson's books and for a lot of fantasy in general. So there are 3 of the 10 books released so far. The 4th one comes out in November of this year, and actually I have started rereading this series. I'm reading my super beaten up mass market paperback because I tried reading the hardback and it was too big. So I am currently in the process of rereading these books because I have only read the first book, which I read back in 2011, and then I read Words of Radiance when it came out in 2012, and then I just never got around to reading Oathbringer when it came out, I think in 2018, because I hadn't read the first 2 books in so long. So this is actually going to be my 3rd read through of the first book, my 2nd of the second one, and it will be my 1st of the 3rd one when I get there. I am actually doing a Stormlight Archive reading vlog right now. I'm gonna vlog my reading of each book, and you can look forward to that whenever the heck I finish The Way of Kings. But I love these. They are so epic in scope, I don't think I could possibly summarize them for you, but basically they take place in a fantasy world that is kind of battered constantly by these huge, incredibly destructive storms called high storms. And we follow a bunch of different characters as they come together and kind of realize they have this linked destiny. My arms are really hurting from holding these up, so I'm going to stop talking about these now, but these are fantastic. If you've never read them and you like high fantasy, I mean, Brandon Sanderson's your guy, and I feel like these are going to be his major series that he sort of pours his heart and soul into. So these are really good, and they're also really heavy. Another extremely popular fantasy series that I have not yet finished is the Farseer series by Robin Hobb. So we have Assassin's Apprentice, Royal Assassin is the second, and then Assassin's Quest. I talk about these all the time on my channel because of the trauma that they put me through. The first book is good. The second book is fantastic, but destroyed my soul so badly that when I got around to trying to read the 3rd book, I physically couldn't do it. I was crying so much and I was so upset. And I am definitely a crier, but usually books they'll make me cry, but they never get me like that upset and that like emotionally damaged. So these are really good. It's been so long since I read the first 2. I think I read the first one, it must have been in 2013 2013 or 2014 maybe, and then I read the second one not too long after that, maybe a year or so after that, and then the third one just never really happened. So it's been so long at this point, I need to actually reread these books in order to get to the last one. So this is another slightly complex one, but basically we have a character named Fitz, and he is the bastard son of the prince, and he basically grows up kind of in the shadow of the castle and kind of sort of being taken advantage of by a lot of people, and it's just a miserable story, but they're wonderful. They're so good. They are not books to read if you want feel-good, happy stuff. I definitely think that this is much more in the vein of Game of Thrones in terms of tone than anything else, but they are excellent. They are so good, and you will want to shake the main character so badly. So next up is another very popular series, however this is sci-fi, and I read the first book, I think just after I moved to the UK, maybe 5 years ago, and absolutely loved it. Tore through the second one and then just never got around to the rest of them. There are 10 books in the series, however it has just finished, and annoyingly Scottish husband has read them all and I am well behind, which is just a theme for anything that I recommend to him. This is The Expanse by James S.A. Corey, starting with Leviathan Wakes, which is this guy here. And yeah, I've read these first 2 books and I found the third and fourth, ooh, these are out of order, the third and fourth in a charity shop, so I picked them up and just never got around to them. I think I started the third one, Abden's Gate, but it had just been so long that I really realized that I needed to reread these. So this is another epic series in scope. Basically, the first one follows 2 storylines. One is a sort of detective in the outer asteroid belt who is trying to find a missing girl, and the other is this crew of a ice hauling ship that makes a very gruesome discovery, and it all spins off from there and becomes a huge story. I have seen the first season of the show and I didn't really love it, but I'd like to give it another try, and I really want to reread these books because they're so much fun. Leviathan Wakes is definitely, for me, felt like the equivalent of watching an incredible sort of a huge summer blockbuster. It was an absolute page turner. I tore through it. I loved it, and I really need to get back to these. So the next series that I have is another completed sci-fi series, however this one is a trilogy rather than being 10 books long, and it is one that I really enjoyed the first book, and I think I can dive into the second without rereading the first. So this is the Embers of War trilogy by Gareth L. Powell. So the first book is The Embers of War, the second is Fleet of Knives, and the third is The Light of Impossible Stars. So this first book follows a couple of different storylines, however there are 2 kind of main ones. So the first follows a former warship, a sentient ship called the Trouble Dog, who has been kind of built for violence and has, you know, committed atrocities during this war, however wants to atone for its sins. So it joins the House of Reclamation, which is an organization that is dedicated to rescuing ships in distress. So the Trouble Dog and her crew get a distress signal from a civilian ship, and they end up getting into this kind of crazy situation. The other storyline, I believe, follows a soldier or a former soldier who has to go after this particular person, this kind of famous public figure who is known as a great poet. However, they are not necessarily what they seem. These storylines converge. I'm really excited to see how the second book goes because I loved the first one, but I felt like the ending was a little bit convenient. However, I think a lot of that is going to be undone in the second. So I have a feeling that my sort of thoughts on these books are definitely going to be shaped by the ones that come after. It'll be a really good one to sort of rate and think about after having a full picture of this series. Next up, I have some books by one of my favorite authors to finish, and I feel a little bit ashamed for having not finished up all of his books, but I do still have The Heroes and Red Country by Joe Abercrombie to finish. So Joe Abercrombie writes in the First Law world. So we start out with the First Law trilogy, then we have the First Law standalones, of which these are the second and third, and then we have a new series kind of set decades later called The Age of Madness. So A Little Hatred is the first book in that series. Trouble with Peace, which I won't shut up about, is coming out in September. That is the second book in that series. So I've read all of those except for these 2. So The Heroes I started, I got 294 pages in and I just couldn't do it. And I remember why, because Scottish Husband made a very, very good point of perhaps when I'm in the middle of a major depressive episode, it's not the best idea to read a really, really, really grim book about war. So there's that. I just couldn't get it through it at that time, but it is one I'm going to restart and then finish. And then Red Country is kind of like a Western set in this world. Apparently it's really good. I'm very excited to read both of these books. I think that he is a marvelous, marvelous author. And the First Law world is one of my favorite fantasy settings, although it's somewhere I would never, ever, ever in a million years want to live in. Next up is another sci-fi series. This is a classic series from one of my favorite authors. This is the Robots series of books by Isaac Asimov. So the first one is The Naked Sun. Very, very good. The second one is Caves of Steel, also very, very good. And then the third one is Robots of Dawn. And if you are thinking that I'm crazy for saying a series or a trilogy and holding up 4 books, we also have a book of short stories that I'm going to kind of tangentially include because I would also really like to read these, even though this is massive. So these are marvelous books. I really, really enjoy them. So the first one, I think this is 60s. Oh wow, okay, so this is actually 1956, this first one was published, The Naked Sun, and these are a marvelous, marvelous read. If you like to kind of see where the foundations of your favorite genres come from, where your favorite tropes evolved from, you should absolutely read Isaac Asimov because he is marvelous. Some people think he's a bit dry. I don't. I think he's fantastic. So the Foundation trilogy is one of my favorite series ever, and I really need to finish the robot books because they are just so much fun. So these books are basically police procedurals. We follow a character named Elijah Bailey, and he is a policeman in one of these great cities on Earth. However, we have tunneled into the ground and mankind lives in the earth. They don't go up to the surface. So he's a cop, basically, and he is assigned a new partner called R. Daniel, and it turns out that he is a robot. And Elijah himself is a very, very, very prejudiced man. Robots are kind of a almost like second-class citizens. They're very kind of controversial. People do not like them. They do not like having them around, taking jobs and things like that. So he is assigned this partner. He has to work with him and he has to overcome his prejudices. So these each follow a different case and they kind of spin off from each other, but there are individual books. It continues on the storyline, but they can definitely be read individually. And they're so much fun. I really, really enjoy these. There's these marvelous sort of images from this book where, for example, there's a chase that happens, I believe in the first one, where he is chasing a suspect kind of on these moving walkways throughout the city and kind of leaping from walkway to walkway and kind of jetting around the city. That's really, really cool. That's like straight out of modern sci-fi. Anything that's like set within a city that you see like on TV or something like that is like straight from this. I really, really enjoy the way that he has his main character sort of examine his prejudices. This obviously is a lot of metaphor for a lot of real life issues. They're just marvelous, marvelous books. I really love classic sci-fi. I need to finish up this series and move on to some other classics because it's just something that I really, really enjoy. And the last 2 series that I have to show off, I've only read the first book from each. However, I do think I'm going to reread both of these in order to continue on with the rest of these trilogies. So the first one is Ninefox Gambit by Yoon-Ha Lee. I have a funny relationship with this book because I read it. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I had no fucking clue what was happening in this. No clue. Everything went way over my head. It's super, super intense, super, super incredibly intricate world building that all has to do with mathematics and calendars and all this crazy stuff. And I didn't really follow what was happening, but I knew it was a really good book. So it's one that I want to give another try. I did read this within the past few years, so I've definitely been reading sci-fi before I picked this up, but I feel like I have a little bit more experience with sci-fi, that this would be a fun one to revisit because, again, it's just whoosh, straight over my head. This is another one that I think is just too complicated to really go into what this is about, so I'll leave links to everything down below. You can check it out, try to puzzle it out for yourself, because it's a really wonderful book. I really want to read the rest of the trilogy because apparently it's fantastic. I've even heard that the second book is even easier to follow than this one, which is great because this first one's really complicated, but it's a wonderful read if you want to have a little bit of a challenge. And last but definitely not least is the Ancillary Justice Trilogy. I think it's called the Imperial Raj Trilogy by Ann Leckie. I've only read this first book. I desperately wanted to get into the second book, but I think that's when I moved from Edinburgh down to Oxford. Life was a little bit busy then, so I never got around to it, and it kind of slipped off of my radar. So I really need to go back and reread this so I can get to the rest of them, because this just totally blew my mind. It is so good. So you're gonna have to follow me a little bit here. This book follows a character named Breck, who is, when the book opens, kind of alone on this icy planet, obviously in search of something. So Breck is formerly known as the Justice of Turin, who is a sentient ship, and they also controlled all of these various ancillary units, basically people who this empire had sort of taken as prisoners, frozen their bodies, and then kind of like wiped their minds so their ships could use their bodies and kind of like inhabit their bodies as well. So there's, I know that's weird. So there's this particular scene that always sticks out to me when I talk about this book, where basically Breck is in orbit and also is in the room with, say, the governor or the diplomat. But there's also two of them outside in the hallway, and they're also out patrolling the square or whatever. It's real weird to get used to, but you actually get used to it very, very quickly. It's a wonderful sort of quest for revenge. It's a fantastic book, and the kind of gender dynamics in this book are really interesting because in this particular empire, everyone uses she pronouns. So Breck has a lot of difficulty sort of figuring out how to distinguish between male and female persons, and also it has a lot of really interesting investigation into gender, what makes you masculine, what makes you feminine, all of that. It's a really, really good book. I cannot wait to dive back into this. I think of all of these, other than like The Way of Kings, which I'm currently reading, this is very, very, very much at the top of my list of books I need to reread. So that is it for this video. These are a bunch of the books that I realistically need to reread in order to finish the series, but all of these series are ones I desperately want to get to because I really, really enjoyed the books that I have read from them. In the comments below, I would love to hear what series you need to finish if you've read any of these books or if they're in your TBR. I post bookish content to this channel fairly frequently, so go ahead and hit subscribe, check back soon, and I will see you next time.